Thank you. Welcome, Dr Sutkowski. We'll kick off. I'll open this meeting of the Senate Environment and Communications Legislation Committee. These are supplementary budget estimates proceedings, and the agencies heard during these estimates are those which have been nominated by various senators. The committee has fixed Thursday the 25th of January 2018 as the date for the return of answers to questions taken on notice at this hearing. Proceedings today will continue the committee's examination of NBN Co Limited. Under Standing Order 26, the committee must take all evidence in public session. This includes answers to questions on notice. Officers and senators are familiar with the rules of the Senate governing estimates hearings. If you need assistance, the Secretariat has copies of the rules. I particularly draw the attention of witnesses to an order of the Senate of the 13th of May 2009 specifying the process by which a claim of public interest or immunity should be raised. Witnesses are specifically reminded that a statement that information or a document is confidential or consists of advice to government is not a statement that meets the requirements of the 2009 order. Instead, witnesses are required to provide some specific indication of the harm to the public interest that could result from the disclosure of the information or the document. Officers called upon for the first time to answer a question should state their full name and position for the Hansard record, and witnesses should speak clearly into microphones. Mobile phones should be turned to silent or switched off. So I do welcome now via video conference Dr Ziggy Sutkowski, the chairman of NBN Co. Now, given time is limited, Dr Sutkowski, do you have an opening statement, or we're right to go straight to questions?
If you're comfortable, Senator, to go to questions, so am I.
Excellent. All right. Well, Senator Urquhart, would you like to start?
Thanks, Dr Sutkowski. Sorry, I've had a long day. Thanks for your time today, and given the short amount of time that we've got, I would appreciate it if you could keep your comments brief and succinct as you can, given that we've got a very short period of time. So can you provide an outline of the board's thinking with regards to the statement of expectations? Do you interpret it as saying NBN should achieve the minimum speed targets at the least possible cost, or that NBN should deliver the best possible network within the $49 billion peak funding envelope?
Senator, at this stage, I interpret the statement of expectations as delivering a fit-for-purpose network by 2020. That has a budget of $49 billion, and there are various levels of speed bands that we think are appropriate within that expectation.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So, does the NBN board remain committed to delivering the project within that $49 billion funding envelope?
We are.
We've been assured the NBN rollout remains on track to be complete by 2020. Can you clarify which part of 2020 that public commitment is that it's referring to? Is it January? Is it December? Is it July? Just when around 2020 is that?
Yeah, Senator, we haven't been very specific, but I think in the light of the variables that we're seeing at the moment, it'll be towards the back end of the year.
Yep. Okay, so closer to December than July, say?
The January, yep. Well, I think it'll be in the second half of the calendar year.
Right, okay, so we'd be talking, say, around October, somewhere around there?
We can't be that specific, but we will put together the next version of the operating plan, and that might give us a better sense of exactly when we land. Okay,
and when will that operating plan be available?
It's on an annual cycle. Typically, it's made available in the August-September timeframe.
Right. Okay. Yep. Okay, hand over to Deb.
Good afternoon, Dr Sutkowski. I've got a couple of questions around the HFC. Sure. Does the NBN Co remain committed to deploying HFC technology to the 2 million odd premises in the current rollout plan where it has not yet been rolled out?
We're certainly committed to rolling out the HFC network. We're going to learn a lot over the next few months as we go through the remediation program, and whether we have the same numerical target or not will be determined in the months ahead.
Okay, so just to be clear, the 2 million, the target at the moment is 2 million. Are you saying that is now being revised potentially?
I don't remember what the target is. I do remember what the goal is for this year.
What's that, Mr Sutkowski?
Well, we 350,000 or thereabouts households who are customers. We probably expect to double that in normal circumstances by the end of this operating year, and then we will be building on that beyond the 2018-19 period. Whether the HFC endpoint numbers get varied in the light of our pause in the rollout and remediation of the network are decisions that are still ahead of us.
So my understanding is it's 3.1 million for the HFC in total. You've passed
That sounds right.
You've passed a million to date with about 350,000 households. So that's 2 million remaining. Are you committed to deploying the HFC technology to that scale?
We're certainly committed to the HFC technology because we know it works around the world and we expect it to continue to work here very well. Whether the 3.1 million households represent the footprint that we find it will be determined as we go through the network remediation process in the next few months.
So when do you think you might be able to provide that information, Dr. Switkowski?
Senator, it'll be, I'm sure, finalised and revealed in the operating plan, which will be, as I had said earlier, in the early months of the 18-19 fiscal year.
Well, I'm sure that you would understand why we would be concerned about so long in between now and then and getting the information. I'd really like to know, will large sections of the planned HFC rollout be actually abandoned?
That's not our expectation at this stage. On the other hand, the decision to pause in the rollout reveals a kind of a serious concern about the need to go back over the network and identify those areas that need remediation and attend to it. That's why we've announced there'll be a pause of 6 to 9 months. Our hope, and absent any change, our plan is to have 3+ million homes on the HFC network.
Sorry, how many?
But I said 3 million plus is the plan, but as we go through the next few months.
Could NBN end up deploying less than the lower bound base case of 2.7 million HFC premises in the 2018 corporate plan?
I have no idea where the number might land, but the difference between 3.1 and 2.7, could that happen? It could happen.
Sorry, what could happen, Dr. Switkowski?
Are you connected to the NBN? There's a lot of buffering going on.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are you connected to the NBN? There's a lot of buffering.
The HFC footprint expects us to pass, as Senator O'Neill has made the point, I think it's 3.1 million homes. That sounds like a familiar number. Clearly, the pause in the rollout of the HFC is intended to give us more confidence in what numbers of homes we will eventually have on HFC. Could that be less than 3.1 million? Yes, it could. Will the number be more certain? Yes, probably in August, September of next year.
So the lower bound base case of 2.7 million HFC premises is actually in the 2018 corporate plan. Could it be lower than that, Dr. Switkowski?
That would be just speculation. I do not know.
Okay. When did the NBN, I hope you'll know this one, when did the NBN board sign off on the proposal to delay the HFC rollout?
The sign-off was at the board meeting on Tuesday, let me check, November the 21st.
And when did the board first become aware of the issues on the HFC and that a delay might be required?
Well, this was you describe it as an escalating process around about the middle of this calendar year. So as we were finalising numbers for the 17-18 plan, we were getting reports back as to the performance of the network and the levels of customer concerns and complaints and the volume of tickets of work that were required in order to address issues.
Before you go on, Dr. Switkowski, would you be able to provide us with, that documentation that informed the board's decision making that you received in the middle of the calendar year? You spoke about the volume of tickets.
Because as I said, it was an escalating awareness on the basis of briefings that the management were giving us at board meetings and outside of board meetings. And it was early on, the commentary around HFC was reasonably familiar. Every time we launch a new platform, you go through a period of learning how to do it well and eliminating problems. But the volume of, or the sheer number of households that the HFC network build was including in the footprint was so great, and the volume of defects was not coming down as a proportion of the footprint, that as we went through July, August and September, the concerns were growing. So that when management put forward the case in the November board meeting, that it was time to pause and go back and attend to the issues, the board had been sort of inclined to that view for some time.
So could I just clarify if the board meeting that was held on Tuesday, the 21st of November, was that a special session or was that your scheduled November meeting?
Yeah, a regular November meeting.
And if we can roll back to the period of time when you talked about customer complaints, the volume of tickets and the increase in defects being reported, did management suggest to you in the middle of this year at the time that the rollout might need to be paused? Was that an early conversation?
No, the concept of a pause was later in that period. I can't put a date to it because these were conversations of increasing gravity around the situation. But certainly when management made the recommendation in November, board members anticipated the recommendation and were certainly of the view that management were right and we would pause and address the issues.
So if I can go to your description of the middle of the year, was it June or July when this escalating process actually happened?
Thereabouts, sounds right now. I don't have a date.
Would your board records indicate that, Dr. Switkowski?
Probably not. I mean, the way these processes work, we have multiple platforms being rolled out. Management is tracking performance metrics, also getting feedback from the industry. They are forming views as to where there are issues and where issues can be resolved. It was probably July when the concerns were building. It was probably not October when we began to realise that we were not improving the rate of complaints as a proportion of our build, and November the decision was taken.
So I'm a little concerned that somebody might not be taking minutes about this important decision-making process and information process. So I'd be surprised if there weren't some board minutes and records around this. If you could take it on notice, Dr. Switkowski, and come back and provide the date at which the delay was first flagged with the board and other significant dates in the journey to the final decision of the Tuesday, the November 21st, where the board signed off on the delay. Chair, if I've got two more questions and then...
Yes, and then we'll go to Senator Steele-John and then back to you for the balance.
Sorry, Dr. Switkowski, you agree to take that on notice?
I'll take the question on notice as you've asked.
Thank you. What was the financial estimate of the impact that was presented to the board?
Well, the financial estimate is still to be settled as we go through the mitigation process or the remediation process and form a firmer view as to how long the delay will be and what the numbers are. So we haven't made public what the figures are likely to be. The figures actually look as if they won't be material in terms of a dollar consequence. As I answered an earlier question, we're still working against a $49 billion project spend, but we don't have the figures and we don't expect to have them until we have some weeks, if not months, of experience in reviewing the network.
So does it concern you that the board was making a decision about this delay without adequate information about the actual cost to the entity?
I think the board's ability to judge where the costs might ultimately land is pretty good. So no, I am not concerned.
So it surprises me somewhat that the board would make a decision without actually knowing what the cost of that decision would be. I mean, we're talking about a very significant project here, Dr. Switkowski. Surely you had numbers to help you make an informed decision?
Well, we have a network which has an unacceptable level of customer experience is a priority. We have to fix it. We have a kind of general sense of what this may mean financially, and we have a pretty rigorous commitment to spending no more than the $49 billion. And so the next step in this process, or a step that is already underway, is to see where we can allocate our resources in order to stay within these guardrails. Get the job done in 2020, spend $49 billion.
Well, that's why I find it impossible to believe that you didn't actually have numbers to inform your decision, Dr Switkowski, at the time that the board was making the decision. Surely you had estimates around the numbers. I can't imagine Mr Rue not providing you with that detail.
Well, I mean, some of those estimates are easily determined by anybody who wants to do the arithmetic. And as I say, the board is a well-informed board. We have a shared view as to what the consequences of this might be, but the CFO will not have numbers that are precise for some time to come.
Well, precision and the sufficiency of numbers for you to make an informed decision, I can see that there might be a difference between that. I'm interested in the numbers that informed the board's decision, because I'm sure you would have had some. Are you able to provide those today?
Again, firstly, I don't believe they're going to be material in the scheme of things. Secondly, we are going to
How
have to
can you
find
say
ways
that,
in
Dr
which to
Switkowski, if you didn't have the numbers?
Allow him to finish his answer, and then we will
offset.
need to
I
go
don't
to
think they're
Senator
going to be
Steele-John.
material. Sorry, I missed that.
So the question is, how can you say they're not material if you didn't have the numbers? You either have the numbers and you make an informed decision, or you don't have the numbers. So if you have the numbers, I would like to know what they are.
No, I said, those of us who are close to this business have a reasonable feel for the costs of these kinds of decisions. We also understand the priorities that are important, namely the customer experience and the fact that we need to get things right. So providing that we've made the decision to focus on the customer experience, and we have a sense that the costs are going to be manageable, and we have a $49 billion goal, we can go ahead and make that call and adjust expectations and budgets as we go forward.
Okay, we
I'll
will
come
have
back to
to
that
go
line
to
of
Senator
questioning.
Steele-John for a few minutes, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair. Dr Switkowski, when you were addressing the opening comment of my colleague, Senator Urquhart, you suggested that your interpretation of the statement of expectations of NBN Co was to deliver a network which was, in your words, a fit-for-purpose network within the $49 billion footprint of the project. Could you very briefly give me what you define as a network which is fit for purpose?
Well, yes, I can. What the statement of expectations leads us to comply with is that we'll get the network built in 2020. We expect to have 8 million paying customers connected to the network. We expect to be probably the only continent in the world where high-speed broadband is available to every premises in the land, delivered by a set of different technologies, from fibre through cable, copper, wireless and satellite, and that we'll be able to provide certain speed bands and download limits that we think will be appropriate to customer demand in 2020.
And your reference again to various speed bands and levels, is that in any way informed by the findings of the Vettigan panel review of 2015?
Look, I hesitate because I can't recall everything that was in the Vertigan summary, but I think we are operating in a way that's consistent with what they have concluded. And again, I offer again the insights that we know what customers at the moment are buying by way of speed tiers, and at the moment the the appetite appears to be at the lower speeds. We also know what the networks are capable of and the limitations. So if you're in a satellite area, in other words, a remote zone, you're likely to be bounded by 25 megabit per second, and wireless is a bit different. So I think those were known parameters that Michael Vertigan would have had access to. So I doubt very much that what I'm saying is separate to what he may have concluded. I certainly hope it's not different.
Would it be fair then to suggest that what the key conclusions of that review would form the kind of outline of what you yourself consider to be a fit for purpose network?
I don't know that that the point of his inquiry went to trying to anticipate what the speed and download limits might be of future customers. My recollection is that there was quite a bit of conversation around ownership of the network, the possibility of compartmentalising the network to create different forms and presumably more competition in the marketplace. I think my recollection again is that there was a reference or a judgment made in his report as to the sufficiency of the proposed speed bands, which I think he concluded would, based on the plans that we had at the time, would be sufficient to meet the needs of most of our customers. I still and I think that is the case.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Senator. Senator Urquhart.
Thank you, Chair. As the chairman, are you confident the company will achieve its ARPU targets by 2020?
We certainly expect to finish the network by 2020. Yes.
Right. So there's no uncertainty. That's a definite yes from what I hear.
Well,
We're paid.
you know that projects of this complexity and scale, none of us will say anything with 100% certainty. But as I've said previously, we do have guardrails around. We've said what the bill is going to be. In fact, we've been careful to say it's 49 plus or minus 2 billion. And we've said the national coverage, we've said how many customers we expect to get, etc.
Dr. Switkowski, sorry to interrupt. We have a division now. Do you have a couple of minutes to hang about? I'm not sure what your timing availability is, but I have to vacate the chair.
I do.
Okay,
No,
excellent.
I'll hang about, as you say.
Beg your pardon, thank you. The committee will suspend until the division's concluded.
Oh, you don't want me to keep going?
No. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Doctor.
Not at
So, Senator Urquhart, were you?
I was asking, Dr Swiskowski was sort of getting through saying that he couldn't provide certainty. So I guess could I just ask a question in terms of that ARPU targets by 2020? Would you caution that there's a bit of uncertainty?
I think there's been uncertainty all the way through.
Yep.
Is there more uncertainty today? Perhaps a bit more, but not materially so.
Right, but you can't give me a guarantee that it will achieve its targets by 2020. Therefore, there's some uncertainty, I guess. That's how I'm summing it up.
If you look at the record of the current management team that Bill Morrow leads, they have hit their numbers every quarter under his leadership. The year ahead may be the first time where some of those numbers are not delivered because of the pause,
Yep.
but we're dealing with a very competent team
Yep.
in a build which is now in its second half.
Yep.
So once we get over the HFC issues, we should be able to sprint to the finish line. So I'm confident we're going to deliver against our expectations, but I can't give you a 100% guarantee.
Okay, yeah, all right. So in a recent speech, you commented that certain changes in the pricing structure would result in a transfer of value from taxpayers to shareholders of telecommunications companies. Can you expand on what your thinking was here, and what risks do policymakers need to be aware of?
Well, I can. Partly that comment was in response to a certain amount of advocacy that the Commonwealth consider writing down the asset in its value, and that would then provide the room to reduce prices to the retail service providers and ultimately to households. Even if those steps were possible, the end result of that would have been a lower return and lower revenues to the Commonwealth. And so that was behind my statement that what we're doing, what the ask was, is to transfer value from taxpayers, etc., to in the first instance RSPs and eventually perhaps households. Something we wouldn't do lightly, probably couldn't do without a lot of consultation with the shareholder ministers. So the other point I made in that speech was that we are going through an extraordinary period where for the first time, and maybe the only time in a generation, householders are being given the opportunity to make a decision about their broadband provider in every instance. That's a scary market for existing players. And so that tends to motivate behaviour that they will fight very hard to market share, and they will do that by trying to make the decision simple and to minimise concerns about pricing. So we see pressure down to lower prices, lower speed tiers, which I think will sort itself out once we get the network built. But we've got 2 or 3 years of this still ahead of us, and I just want to caution the industry that this is not the time to start making big strategic decisions when everything around us is moving the way it is.
Okay. So some of NBN's customers are also potentially their primary strategic competitors. That would be right, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we understand modems are now being deployed which can readily take SIM cards. So once subscriber payments switch off, is there a risk that the market will change its behaviour?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring to, are there technologies emerging that will compete with NBN, like
Yes.
5G wireless? And the answer to that is yes. Is the level of competition going to currently? It might be. This is, any industry based upon these fast-moving technologies is hostage to being surprised down the line. And we have spent a lot of time looking at 5G. We are not pioneers in this country. There are other markets that have moved into 5G a little earlier, so we are watching how that is playing out. For the time being, the goals that we've set for NBN out through 2020 still appear to be appropriate.
Okay. All right. Oh, that's all the questions I have. Senator O'Neill has a few before we wrap up.
And we'll conclude at 6:10, Doctor.
So a quick one.
Thank you.
The financial estimate of the impact that was presented to the board, it must have happened in June, July, August, September, October or November at some point of time. Would you be able to provide the financial details that informed the board's decision?
Yes, when Stephen reproduces them in the next several months.
Introduces them to the board. So are you telling me the board made the decision without the numbers?
No.
Right, we
No,
want the numbers, Dr. Switkowski.
Senator O'Neill, let me give you an example of the sort of arithmetic that plays out in this case. We have 350,000 HFC customers, and in pausing, we will not add another 300,000 customers over the next 6 months. So you can take the 300,000 customers, you can say you're not going to get the revenues from those customers over that 6-month period. You can very quickly determine that the revenue foregone in the second half is about $50 million. That's what I mean. We can do those figures. We know they're not material, and that's before we weigh the cost of remediation against cost savings elsewhere.
So it was based on that kind of verbal articulation that the board made the decision to stop the HFC rollout. It was as
The board made a decision when it observed the fault rates in the network and attempted to reconcile them with our determination to have householders happy with the service that they were getting. So the quality imperative was number one.
Dr. Switkowski, I've only got a few minutes. I'm asking you for the board papers for those months between June and November, so that we can understand the rationale and the informed decision-making that I'm sure you made based on numbers to make that decision, rather than just a conversation.
The numbers that you really want are the numbers that are going to have the imprimatur of the CFO, and those numbers will be ready in the future.
The board undertaking their fiduciary responsibilities should have had numbers to inform their decision. They're the numbers I'm after, Dr. Switkowski. Can I also ask, in recent times, has the board been presented with a proposal to abandon the HFC and switch towards fibre to the curb?
No.
There has been no proposal.
We are looking at fibre to the curb, absolutely. We are trialling it. We expect to escalate our use of fibre to the curb.
In HFC areas?
Oh, I'm sure it'll overlap in some HFC areas, yes.
But there is no formal presentation that has been put to the board at any point of time to that end?
No.
There appears to be a general view that the NBN will not be able to maintain a 74% market share going forward. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I'm not aware that's a general view. I mean, it is an assumption in our forward estimates. But as we've talked about earlier, in this industry, with the technology shifts that are happening, can anybody be absolutely confident as to what the uptake will be of fixed line broadband in 2020? The answer to that is not really.
And how does the board think about these competitive risks? What analysis do you undertake to assess your risk at any point of time?
Well, again, we certainly have a risk register, and high on that risk register is the emergence of wireless broadband. It's not only just a downside risk, it's an upside opportunity as well, as we're finding telcos around the world are experimenting with. So wireless alternatives are part of the in front of the board.
Sorry, you broke up. You literally did buffer in that period, Mr. Switkowski.
We don't have a direct NBN connection, Senator O'Neill.
It's all about the fibre, Mr. Switkowski.
I suspect it's probably a satellite link we have here. But anyway, look, 5G is going to be. We're going to talk about 5G a lot in the years ahead. Whether it substitutes fixed line broadband or is additive to and complementary, whether wholesale providers like NBN will be constrained from our use of 5G, which I suspect is not the case, whether the risks are all downside versus some upside opportunities, all of those things are in the mix at the moment. There is no simple narrative yet.
Could you clarify for me if you're saying there'll be no revenue delay from the other 2 million homes due to receive the HFC not going ahead?
No, I didn't say that. I was just referring to the delays associated with the immediate pause and the impact that I can calculate in the next 6 months. I think in 18-19 we'll see a continuing consequence of the pause. But the task that we have at the moment is to see if we can shape the rollout so that when we finish in 2020, we've made up some ground.
Okay, so what's the important things that NBN must do to preserve the market share that you have?
That of course, is a different discussion. If you're asking, what are you asking? Are you asking market share versus wireless broadband, or just absolute interest in fixed line broadband?
Well, you've described in the corporate plan that you need to maintain 74% of the market share going forward. That's the assumption. So against that assumption...
It's our working assumption, yes.
What are the most important things NBN must do to preserve market share?
Well, I think the faster we can complete the rollout, the more confident we will be of winning that market share. I think the experience that people have with their NBN service in terms of being error-free and delivering on the speeds, etc., are critical, so we're focusing on that. We expect that fixed line broadband is going to be enormously relevant and frankly indispensable for some time to come. But is there uncertainty around some of our assumptions? Of course there is.
Do you share the view of the NBN CEO, Mr Morrow, that mobile services should be taxed?
I don't know that that is his view, although I think you're probably referring to a report that implied that.
Is it necessary for NBN to survive? Is it necessary that mobile services be taxed in order for NBN to survive?
Now, put that way, I would say no.
What way do I have to put it to get you to say yes, Mr Switkowski? I just want to have a clear read of, what's your position around taxing mobiles, the competitors to your business model?
Well, my position is to focus entirely on getting the network built and doing it within the budget, making it fit for purpose. And if we can get it built on the timetable we're describing, with the performance characteristics that we've committed to, then it'll be a wonderful asset. It will not require any particular intervention when it comes to other technologies.
Mr Switkowski, you might not have enough time to answer these questions. Could I just put them on the record and on notice? A few years ago, Senator Ludlam asked you whether you'd advised the coalition on the NBN policy it took to the election, and he said, in the question I put to you just previously, you said you'd never advised the coalition on policy it took to the election, so what kind of views were being sought, if not policy views? You replied, one has conversations with politicians about matters all the time. Senator Ludlam then, nothing to do with NBN policy, rising inflection at the end. Then Dr Switkowski, you said, no, Mr Turnbull and I go back a ways. He has a large range of interests. I had been out. It would have been presumptuous of me to offer views on the NBN policy when I had spent the previous several years at some distance from the telecom industry. Mr Switkowski, could you expand on Mr Turnbull's large range of interests and those which you discussed? Also, what director of chair roles did you hold in other companies prior to taking up the chairman role of the NBN Co? And one more question I'll put on notice.
Okay, we'll conclude there. Thank you very much, Doctor. So that does conclude our examination this evening, and questions on notice need to be in by Friday the 8th, so this Friday. I'll also note that the next round of estimates hearings for the committee is scheduled for Monday the 26th of February and Tuesday the 27th next year. And the committee, of course, reminds NBN Co that all relevant officers should be available to appear before the committee on these dates. And we thank you, Doctor, for making yourself available tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The committee is adjourned.
Okay. Thank you.